Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I'm very well aware that no one is here to listen to me. We've got an amazing panel here, so I'll be very brief. First and foremost, I know everyone's thinking about the victims of the hurricane in western North Carolina and across the southeast. I just wanted to recognize that although we're sitting here, we're all thinking about those folks and how we can help them. I'm sure many folks here have family and friends dealing with the aftermath from that terrible hurricane. So we're at a minimum, we just want to send them thoughts and prayers. I'd like to thank Law School Dean Martin Brinkley for being here, and also Senior Associate Dean Kelley Podger-Smith as well as our faculty and students who have made the time to join us. Where there's chaos, there's opportunity. And in college athletics, there's a lot of chaos lately over the past several years and probably for the next few looking forward. So there's tons of opportunity. And as lawyers, that's where we can jump in and hopefully take advantage of this situation in positive ways. This is a space where entrepreneurs and innovators tend to play and thrive. It's where they get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And we try and solve problems. These innovators and entrepreneurs are our clients at the Institute for Innovation. We work with smart, creative people who build businesses and hope to solve a wide range of problems and have a positive impact on society. We have 3 clinics at the Institute: our Startup NC Clinic, our nonprofit clinic, also known as our Community Development Law Clinic, and our Intellectual Property Clinic. Each clinic has 8 students each semester that handle real clients and real matters. Our faculty and students are amazing. And if you're here, I'd like you to please stand up so I can recognize you guys. Any law students in the clinics or faculty here? Yes, no, maybe? There you go. Dustin runs our intellectual property clinic. Now I'd like to turn things over to Martin Brinkley just to say a few words on behalf of the law school. Martin's our dean.
Thank you so much, Aaron. So grateful to all of you for being here. This is a wonderful, wonderful group, and this is going to be a fascinating conversation. Aaron has already said part of what I was going to say, which is what the Institute for Innovation is. I'll just fill in a tiny bit of color, which is we represent entrepreneurs, both for-profit and not-for-profit. They come from across the state of North Carolina. We have particularly vibrant partnerships with other campuses of the UNC system, with the Channel organization, which is a laboratory for startups down in Wilmington. We are beginning a relationship with the folks in Elizabeth City. And of course, we represent clients here on the campus at UNC and on the campus at NC State. So this is a 3-clinic institute. Aaron is its executive director. He does a magnificent job in pulling together programs like this, and I'm grateful to him. I get to serve as director, sort of alongside being dean, which is really just a fun ride for me because he does all the real work. So thank you so much, Aaron.
Thank you, Martin. So now I'd like to introduce Lissa Broome, who's an amazing colleague. Lissa's the Burton Craig Distinguished Professor at the law school. She's a director of the Center for Banking and Finance, and she's UNC's faculty athletics representative since 2010. She's going to introduce the panelists.
Thanks, Aaron, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. This event is also being co-sponsored by the Faculty Athletics Committee. Would my colleagues on the Faculty Athletics Committee please stand and be recognized? So as Aaron said, we've got a terrific panel up for you today. So first I'd like to introduce Courtney Banghart. Courtney is our head women's basketball coach. She's been here since 2019, and she came to us from Princeton, where she had a stellar career there. Jay Bilas probably needs no introduction. Show what an ecumenical group we are. We know that he played basketball at Duke and also got a law degree there and practices law as of counsel with Moore & Van Allen in Charlotte. He is ESPN's top basketball analyst, and we know he has opinions on lots of things that I know he's willing to share with us. So we're really interested in hearing those as we go forward. Bubba Cunningham needs no introduction to this audience. He's been our athletic director since 2011, previously served in the same role at Tulsa and Ball State. He's recognized in college athletics as a leader, including this year as serving as chair of the NCAA Men's Basketball Selection Committee. So he will be very busy and under a big microscope come March by his friend Jay Bilas there. And he's also on the board of directors of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, and had the opportunity to be in Paris representing them this past summer. Jim Delany, a UNC undergrad and UNC law graduate, served as commissioner of the Big Ten Conference for over 30 years, stepping down in 2020. He helped create the Bowl Championship Series, which is now morphed into the College Football Playoff, and we all know how big and important that is. And while at the Big Ten, he created the Big Ten Network, securing the economic future of that conference. Aranza Vazquez, in her final year, her 5th year of eligibility for the UNC's swim and dive team. She is, get this, a 4-time national champion, two in championships in the 1-meter springboard and 2 in the 3-meter springboard, 7-time ACC champion, and she has competed in 2 Olympics, Tokyo and most recently in Paris, and is going for another one as well. So, Aaron, kick this thing off.
All right, so we're going to solve all these issues in about the next hour and a half, so y'all be ready for that. So there's seismic changes in the landscape of college athletics. A lot of it started in 2021. We've got name, image, and likeness, collectives, antitrust litigation, and the House settlement that you guys have all heard about. Our student athletes are going to be employees, potentially independent contractors. What's happening on Capitol Hill? Legalized betting in college sports. If you guys watched the tournaments last year, the commercials were just in your face. You couldn't avoid it. Conference realignment, and all of this requires dollars. So where's the money going to come from? So Bubba, let's start with you. Name, image, and likeness. What happened in 2021 to kind of change the landscape of college athletics?
I'll get to that in a minute, but it's going to be challenging for me in March to figure out how Duke's ranked number 1 in the country and not in the tournament. That'll be part of next year's panel. There's an awful lot. You mentioned so many things going on in college athletics, and it's nice of everyone to be here to hear all of us talk about the changes that are going on, and that we have no idea what the future looks like, and we can't tell you what the future looks like. But what I can say is there was a landmark decision in 21, but it was the second time that the NCAA was told they're in violation of antitrust. First time was in 1984. And Oklahoma and Georgia sued the NCAA for the right to televise and broadcast football games. And they were told you're in violation of antitrust, but there's a public good to what you do, and we'll give you wide latitude to make decisions. And so for the next 30 years, I think we tried as an association to make good decisions. We tried to make decisions that would be good for our student athletes. We tried to have competitive equity. We were certainly growing from a gender equity standpoint. And we were trying to do things that help students progress academically. All of the rules that we put in place were designed to increase our graduation rates, to get kids to participate in sport. But in 2021, so we're told again in 2021 that we're in violation of antitrust and there's no public good to what you're doing, and we're going to be more punitive in the future. And that's what Judge Kavanaugh kind of layered on that decision. That was the Alston case. And because of that, we started in with NIL. So it gave the students the right to monetize their name, image, and likeness. And I think when that started, the hope was there would all be legitimate business activity that students could monetize. But what we quickly saw were collectives, a group of people that were collecting money, trying to find ways to give that to student athletes so that they would participate at their institution. And so that has been fraught with all kinds of different challenges and problems for us. That, coupled with the transfer portal, has certainly exacerbated the problems in college athletics that we see. So what we have seen over those 30 years, meteoric rise in the commercial value of sport. Now we're talking about a different economic model than what we've had in the past. And that's what we're trying to wrestle with now. And the courts are really pushing us in the direction that we're going to have to go next. And we're going to have to work with the courts and work with our legislators to think as what is the best thing that we can do going forward to change this economic model to support our student athletes.
Thank you. Courtney, looking at your team and your players, how have they been able to take advantage of name, image, and likeness? And has it changed their relationship with you? Has it changed the dynamic within the locker room at all?
I think there's a lot of individual answers to that, right? I think some, the name, image, and likeness, as Bubba alluded to, was originally put in place that would allow them to basically earn income for the things that they've been able to do. And then the collectives have come in, which is a different form of income. So, it's complicated. It's complicated everything, but I kind of always say this, that sport really is about the student athletes who play it and those that love it, right? And now the model is a little bit different in terms of how we can maintain keeping our kids happy and valued differently than maybe they were in the past. But it mirrors a little bit of the workforce now, right? There's a little bit different valuation for your performance than there was equity before. So where playing time was minutes played, playing time also now has some financial value to it because that you provide value to your team in a way that's now can be monetized. In terms of how coaches handle it for the locker room, I would feel like it's not fair of me to answer that for the group because I'm sure it's very different. I've heard all different scenarios, one of which we tell everybody exactly what they're getting, and we tell everybody so everybody knows. Right, and we've also heard stories where that's not the case, and we sign NDAs, and it's really no one else's business how much or how little you're doing. Also, there's an element of choice. So even though you have the choice to expand your own income base, that takes an enormous amount of time. And I think sometimes what we forget is how much the student athlete's time is strapped, right? They're getting this great access to a great education that maybe wouldn't be accessible to them in other ways. And yet we're saying, we're gonna move your game to a Tuesday, because that helps for TV, which means you might miss a little bit more class. And by the way, we have a recruit in town, so we need you on Saturday to be with the recruits. We're gonna move practice to Saturday. So they can't really have a job otherwise because we take so much of their time. But they have a choice if they want to add to their plate time-wise to try to get more income. That will take from something. So it's a little bit of a time management issue. So I think there's as many examples of how people take advantage of the NIL as there are people that are playing on teams. And then also the collective, I think there's many ways that coaches handle collectives as there are programs in college, is what I would say.
Aranza, how has NIL impacted you personally in swimming and diving world, especially with the Olympics just passed? So how have you been impacted?
Well, sadly, I cannot take advantage of NIL. I'm an international student, so the federal law says that as I'm on a visa that is a student visa, if I were to do any contracts or anything where I'm getting an income in the United States, I would count as a worker, so I would have to have a different type of visa. But there's things that I've heard. I think swimming and diving, sadly, it's a sport that it's not as, you cannot make as much money as you can with football or basketball or any other sport. It's not as popular, it's not as visible, but there's definitely advantages that you can take. For example, in my country, diving is a big sport. So if I were to be there and I would have done what I did at the Olympics and everything that I've done here, I would have done it in Mexico, I would honestly be getting so much money that I wouldn't even have to worry about what's going to happen after graduation. But sadly, that's not the case. So NIL has affected the sport in a way where it is a possibility. I think in swimming and diving, it has affected it in a good way. But I've also heard, as Coach Courtney was saying, all the different things where now I'm doing the sport because I want the money and not because I love it. And I am a truly believer that if you're doing your sport, it's because you love it and not because of what's coming. On the other hand, I do agree that it's a great opportunity. We cannot have jobs if you're doing the sports that you're doing as a D1 athlete or like as a professional athlete. Like it's hard to make an income out of like a 9-to-5 job. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to get money doing what we love. But I don't agree on the part that it's like, this is all I'm doing it for. So it's affected me in a way where like I cannot make any money out of it. But it also like I see like the two sides of the coin where like it can be a beneficial part for a lot of athletes, but it also can be like bad for the institutions or for like other people.
All right, Jay, you're the lawyer, so you get the contract question. So nil is not supposed to be used as an incentive in the recruiting folks, but it seems like it's become a kind of the pay for play. And then you look at what happened just last week. You know, we put this together, and a couple of days things change. You see what happened with the quarterback at UNLV. So there aren't agreements in place. So what are your thoughts on pay for play? And there's no agreements between the athletes and the schools. Kind of, what are your thoughts on that?
All of that's due to NCAA restrictions. In my view, if the NCAA took off all restrictions and let the schools do what they want to do, this wouldn't be so complicated. It's amazing how we can pay everybody else just fine and the business runs just fine, but we can't figure out how to pay the athletes. This is all due to NCAA restrictions. They don't want the players to be employees. They don't want the schools to pay directly. So I don't think anybody here envisioned when NIL came in that collectives would pop up, that would be what would happen in the interim before we ultimately figure this out. And we will figure it out. But to me, you know, for years, the NCAA, decades even, you know, the NCAA has been under this phony notion that you can stop the flow of money to where value exists. And they told us that the players weren't worth more than a scholarship. And it's kind of like the love of the game nonsense. You know, love and money are not mutually exclusive. You know, we don't say to coaches, well, you should coach for free because you love the game and you love teaching young people. You know, when John Shire goes in for his negotiation, they'll say, hey, you're lucky to be here and working with young people and doing what you love. Therefore, you should take, you know, your expenses only. We don't do that. We're going to get used to this pretty quick. And once some more of these court cases come through, when the House settlement is done, and the schools can pay directly the players, then hopefully, you know, the NCAA will see that there's value in signing players to contracts. And you sign them to a contract with an arm's length negotiation, whether it's collectively bargained or not. You can have contract conditions in it that benefit the school and certainly benefit the athlete. I just don't think this is that complicated. We're making it complicated. And right now, the NCAA is begging Congress for an antitrust exemption. And it's almost like the irony is lost on the NCAA that a serial antitrust violator is asking Congress for an antitrust exemption. It's kind of laughable in a way. But, you know, we got to get out of this provincial thinking. This is a multi-billion-dollar entertainment industry that we're running off college campuses. And you know, I'm dating myself here, but it's not like Ed McMahon knocked on the NCAA's door and handed them a publisher's clearinghouse check for billions. This business was built up intentionally and purposefully over the last, you know, since 1984. Bubba's right. Like, people say this is the most transformative period in NCAA history. I think it was 1984. That's where the money exploded, when the schools and the conferences could do their own media rights deals. Because the NCAA and Walter Byers used to tell the schools how often they could be on television because they were trying to protect gate receipts, which they thought was that's where the money is. They didn't see the money coming in media rights. And I don't think anybody imagined it would turn into this. But once they saw the money, and we'll play on Tuesday night, and you know, not to get off topic, but a lot of administrators will come up to me when we have a 9:30 game, sometimes here, and 9:30 game on a Tuesday, and they'll say, what are we doing? The players have to go to school tomorrow, and the fans aren't going to get home till after midnight. And I have to say, wait a minute. You can play your games whenever you want. You can play all noon on Saturday if you want. We pay more at 9:30, and you took the money. You sold us the right to broadcast this game at 9:30. It's just business. and it's business with the players. And as soon as we kind of admit that and start acting like that, I think a lot of these problems get solved.
So Bubba, you had mentioned collectives earlier. I want to go back and ask you a little bit about the collective or collectives that we have here at Carolina, how they interface with the Rams Club, and are the contributions tax deductible?
We have a great relationship with our collective, and the contributions to, we have two different collectives. We have a not-for-profit, which is the North Carolina Hall of Fame, that is tax deductible. And then we also have Old Well Management, and that's the commercial arm of that tax deductible organization. That's not tax deductible. But if you contribute to the Rams Club and they support the not-for-profit side, then yes, that is a not-for-profit gift that is countable. So, I mean, in addition to the laws and the complications that we're making it, the tax laws certainly come into play here as well.
Okay. So, Jim, let's get to you. How does Title IX impact NIL at a particular school?
I think probably the right answer for now is just TBD. Whether you're with the Women's Sports Foundation or whether you're a student athlete at Oregon or whether you're, president of a university, this will get sorted out. The plaintiffs don't give a hoot, nor does the judge. So it's going to be really interesting to see exactly. And I think part of it depends upon who's in the White House and who's running the Department of Education. That law was passed in 1972 and really didn't go anyplace for a long time, maybe a decade or more. And then it got more active depending upon the administration and who is running the Department of Education. So I think you should watch carefully, who wins the election and who's running the Department of Education. Because the individual, when Betsy DeVos was in education, she had one set of thoughts. When Arnie Duncan was there, he had another set of thoughts, and they tend to go down into the system. It's no different than, Department of Labor, NLRB, Treasury, Defense. It's going to be influenced by politics. I will say this, though. The law hasn't, the Sherman antitrust law hasn't changed very much. Especially Section 1 hasn't changed very much. It's simply a agreement among competitors, and there are different categories and different tests that would apply to any particular agreement among competitors. But in 1984, the NCAA got a wake-up call, a splash of cold water in their face, simply because in 1960, when Pete Rozelle went to Washington, D.C., to get permission to merge the leagues and get some antitrust help. The NCAA was at that meeting, and they told the high schools and the colleges, there's no need for you to be here or even worry about antitrust law. So from 1960 to 84, there was not much going on. And everybody mentions Georgia in Oklahoma bringing the lawsuit against the Board of Regents against the NCAA, but really, it was much larger than that. The presidents at both those places, Banowski and I think Davidson at Georgia and Banowski at Oklahoma, were part of that lawsuit. But so was the ACC, so was the SEC, so was Notre Dame, so was the Southwest Conference, so was the WAC, and so was the Big Eight. They didn't like being told what to do with their TV. And Notre Dame was always interested in doing what they wanted to do in TV, all the way back to the beginning of television. And there were two conferences that opposed that, the Big Ten and the Pac-10 at the time. I don't know all the reasons behind it, but they didn't think that it was necessarily the greatest idea. Now, who are the three that benefited the most? The SEC, the Big Ten, and Notre Dame. They're the ones with market power. And that was the intention of those 7 justices, was to allow the market to work and to not constrain output in order to raise prices. That's what they were found guilty of. Now, there was an individual, it was a 7-2, decision, and Byron Wizard White, I'm only going to paraphrase here, but he didn't think that education and commercialism could sit next to each other with education surviving. And so I think it's important. I think that case is an important case. But there was also dicta in that case that would indicate that a lot of the things that the NCAA historically had done were okay. But Jay is right. It took many years, and I would tell you that I was on some of the negotiating teams in the early 80s that did some of these deals, and the nominal dollars that were earned in those series of agreements with CBS, ABC, and Turner were not achieved for almost pretty close to a decade. Nominal dollars. I'm not talking about real dollars, because what happened was it was largely a business of selling advertisements. And if you have 10 rating points and you have 4 games versus 1, the advertising rates are going to come down to a quarter, and you're just going to split up. But ESPN found another way to do this, and they charge subscription along with advertising, and that was a real breakthrough in media. And in fact, anybody who didn't have a subscription business really stayed on the sideline until ESPN decided to buy what they wanted to buy. And I remember in the recession of 1991, everybody was saying, you need to expand women's opportunities to 75-25. We're cutting football scholarships, we're cutting basketball scholarships, we're doing all these draconian, politically difficult things to do, but we're not making any more money. We distributed $20 million in 89-90, $20 million. Recently, it's been $800 million. But we were all kept in our place by ESPN, really for about 20 years. Every time the ACC came up, the Pac-12 came up, the Big 10 came up, or the SEC came up. Wasn't it interesting that we all earned about the same amount of money? How does that happen? We weren't all equal. Some of us had bigger brands, bigger markets, but ESPN was the major player. 2 things happened. One is the Big Ten started its own network and opened up a gap. And others tried the same thing, some successfully, some not so successfully. But what's also interesting, the people that weren't in those leagues wanted to get into those leagues. Why? Because they wanted some of that revenue share. But some of the same people who wanted to take the media and TV revenues away from small colleges, now we're in a situation where they wanted to leave their conference to get involved with the SEC or the Big Ten. So there's a certain irony to this. I think Wizard White had it probably right. I think it was fair for the NCAA to think that some of the things they were doing could pass Sherman antitrust consideration. But where we go from here, I know where we were. Where we go from here is not really clear to me, because I don't think Washington gives a flip much about what's going on here. However, it will when this Title IX issue comes into focus. Because in Washington, I think the concern for women's rights and treatment of women is stronger than any other consideration that deals with groups of people. It's a very powerful. In fact, I was with a junior senator from one of our states, and I said, the law hasn't changed, but the narrative got developed that we were exploiting people. And it wasn't about education, that it was about money. And that prevailed. And a lot of people were very animated about that point. And that point is still going to exist if the money that is paid out in damages to players goes to men and women equally. That is going to come right around to exactly the same narrative that's occurred because football and basketball players earn it but don't get it. If football and basketball players earn it and they don't get substantially more than anybody else, the same narrative is going to apply.
So on that narrative, Courtney, what are coaches of women's teams thinking about these Title IX issues and what looks to be like men's basketball and football players will be getting most of the money that's going to be coming out of these settlements and so forth?
Well, I think we have to put, as coaches, we have to trust our leadership, right? And obviously sitting alongside Bubba, you trust that, when we look at whether it's the Alston money or other things, when given an opportunity, he's supported women, right? So that's the one thing you do. And then also you recognize that we are more valuable than ever before as a sport also. And so the timing couldn't be better for women's basketball. I've said this all the time, like the ACC network plays on Thursdays. That's when the TNT and NBA is on. So it's not a window that's great for basketball, right? And then you go right down the line. You play on Sundays. Well, the NFL is playing for a lot of the Sundays, right? So we're so excited we're on TV. And then what happened is Fox tried something. And they put UConn playing, and they put Caitlin Clark playing. And the national championship game that was just played this past year was watched by more fans than any basketball game in history. NBA, college, Olympics, doesn't matter, right? But you put us at a time on a window that wasn't competing with other massive things, and so more eyes are now on it, and so the product is more popular than ever. So we're still behind in some of those things with TV, and we've really challenged TV. I challenged ESPN at our ACC meetings very directly when I said that Duke Carolina men are a huge basketball, men's basketball has a huge window there. And you know what they put on right before that game? They put on Kansas playing who knows who. They don't even, ESPN isn't in a relationship like they are with the ACC. So who should be on that is the Duke Carolina women. At the other, we should play before them at one campus and the men play after. And the guy looked at me and he was like, I was like, no one's ever thought of that? This is the first time this has been thought of, right? Because then you can have Jake and call both of them. He can just drive over and so I think it's really continuing to push that give us an opportunity. I know it's going to sound like that's what women need to do is fight, but you're damn right. That's what we have to do, right? And so give us an opportunity, not competing on all the windows the men don't want. And we have proven over and over again that the viewership is higher than ever before. And so I think we'll just continue to prove our value, and this is an economic model that I luckily don't have to. That's not my main job. My main job is to make sure that the product is continuing to be valuable to other people, and then the value will ultimately speak for itself.
I can attest to your point about the women's Final Four the last 2 years. I paid attention more to that than I did the men's Final Four ever. I mean, and it was amazing. I think the personalities.
2 years ago, the more famous players, Caitlin Clark and Leah Boston, if you asked anyone, including like my mom, who knows nothing about basketball, name 2 players in the Final Four, men or women, they'd name 2 of the women's players. Right. And so, I watch over 1,000 men's games a year. So I love basketball. I don't care. I watch my little son play. I don't care. I just love basketball. But I'm telling you, the popularity is he finally gave us a chance, and it's going really well.
That's great. Jim, what are your thoughts, generally speaking, about the transfer portal? How it not only affects football, basketball, but all the sports. I played 4 years of college soccer here, and I'm still close with the assistant coach here, and he tells me all the time how every year you guys are coming, going. It's very different. It's hard to build a team. What are your thoughts?
Well, my dad was a high school coach, and I wanted to transfer after my sophomore year. We had lost a national championship game, but I didn't have a lot to do with winning or losing that game. And he said, well, why would you think about that? And I said, well, I don't know. I'm just not playing at all. And he said, well, what they promise you? And I said, well, they promised me a chance to get an education, chance to play. I said, what have they given you? He said, a chance to get an education, chance to play. So he said, you're not going anyplace. So that, that's not like the way that it is today. I will tell you that there were some really very serious mistakes made in the NCAA regulatory system. In my judgment, football and basketball, hockey players, and maybe baseball players had one set of rules, and Olympic athletes, largely white, could transfer willy-nilly. No one really cared too much. And that was just not, could not stand inspection. And when people finally woke up to it, and it wasn't really that long ago. I mean, I've been out for 5 years, so maybe it was 10 years ago. They had a fork in the road. And I don't know why they took the fork that they did. They could either deregulate it, or they can make everybody sit out a year, or put some reasonable restraints around it. Instead, they liberalized it, and then they tried to manipulate on a case-by-case basis, and they couldn't make any rational sense out of the exceptions they were giving. So it just totally blew up in their face. But I kind of agree with Jay. Some of this stuff will come back into a better perspective. You want money? You train how I want you to. You move when I want you to. You move less or you move more. So it could be it could be maybe unusual that some players who aren't being paid move and some players who are being paid don't move. But I do think that all of that movement. I had a friend who got fired from his coaching job last year, and so he was traveling around watching other coaches run their practices early in the season, and I went with him on 3 trips in the Nashville area, and it was unbelievable. One place had 13 new players. One place had 11 new players, and the other place had 8 new players, and I just don't know what that is. I mean, AAU teams have more stability than that. One.
Not anymore.
Yeah, but I don't know what that is, because these are still university-sponsored events, and you would expect there to be some connectivity between the student body and the player, and there isn't. And so that's just the state of affairs. So I could understand some maybe one-time transfer, but moving from school to school to school to school just seems to me to be a head-scratcher.
Yeah, I grew up around here, and obviously the Carolina Duke basketball thing's huge. And I remember growing up, I ended up being a Carolina fan, and you got to know the other team too. You got to know the Duke players that stuck around, and it was great for college basketball. And around here, folks love their college basketball. And it's very different. I talk about my brothers with my brothers all the time. I'm the middle of 3. We all love sports. And it's just different, and it would be great if we could get back
I would like to
somehow.
see, I mean, I think it would be, I don't know about fair is not a great word, but something that makes some sense. If a person came to campus, they wanted to come, give them some money, if you want to give them some money for a couple years, and just do a 2-year deal. And then after that, you're not happy, I'm not happy, nobody's happy, but at least you gave 2 years to try to make it work one way or the other from a playing perspective, an academic, cultural perspective. And then if you want to go someplace else. But the school and the individual made an effort to create this connection between the school and the player. Right now, I think it's too mobile.
Jay, what are your thoughts on tampering in general? The NCAA prohibits tampering. Do you see name, image, and likeness and the collectives impacting that rule?
Of course, but my question has always been, what is tampering with an years ago, not necessarily now, but what is tampering of an unpaid amateur student? It kind of makes no sense. And to Jim's point, I think one of the things that the NCAA has had to deal with is they've been trapped by their own rhetoric. For decades, the NCAA would say that athletes are just students who happen to be athletes, which is nonsense. When I got recruited by Coach K, he didn't find me in the library and say, hey, you look like a good student. You don't happen to play basketball, do you? That's not what happened. And they also say that athletes are students to be treated like any other student. Well, that's never been true. No other student is restricted in what they can earn or accept, or restricted in whether they can leave and go to another school if that school wants them and participate in any extracurricular activity they want, except for varsity athletics. Athletes were the only ones that were restricted. And to Jim's point, and he's absolutely right, most people didn't understand the transfer restrictions. They applied only to 5 sports: football, men's basketball, women's basketball, baseball, and hockey. Everybody else could transfer whenever they wanted, but nobody cared. Nobody cared. They only cared about the money sports. And that was hurting the NCAA's image in court when they were fighting over money. So they punted it. And it really made no sense to sit out in the first place from going from a philosophical standpoint. When Jim was playing here at North Carolina, freshmen were ineligible. And so the transfer restriction was called a year in residence. When you transferred, you needed that year to get used to your new school. Well, it makes no sense in today's world that a freshman can be eligible right away. It doesn't, with no college experience whatsoever, coming out of high school, plays right away. But a junior that transfers has to sit out a year to get used to his or her new school with 3 years of college experience. I mean, that made no sense. And the NCAA knew it, that all those years of having sort of nonsensical policy was going to crush them in court. And so they came up with this ridiculous transfer portal. And one of the reasons the portal came in, where there's so many coaches were upset that they would learn about a player's transfer when the player transferred. Now the player has to give them notice and go into the portal and be recruited and all that stuff. But the way it worked, back in the day when you transferred, was a player would tell his AAU coach or his high school coach, "Look, I'm unhappy, and I'm thinking about leaving." And the AAU coach or the high school coach would contact other schools and say, "Hey, my guy's unhappy. You got a spot." And they would kind of negotiate it out, and the player wouldn't have any contact. The coach wouldn't have any contact. Is that tampering? I don't know what it is. But when coaches complain about tampering, what they're really saying is, look, this is affecting an asset that we own. But they're also saying that we work in an unethical profession. And several years ago, I went to the NABC, the National Association of Basketball Coaches, and I said, look, I made a presentation to them that you need to start licensing your coaches. And when coaches misbehave in your ranks, you need to sanction them yourself and maybe suspend or pull their license, and the schools and the NCAA will jump in on it. They'll take your decision, and they didn't want to do it. They don't want to. Now, there were some legal issues they felt were hurdles, but I thought that, lawyers police themselves. May not work perfectly, but it works fairly well. And there's no reason why coaches couldn't do it. But it shows how valuable these players are. Collectives exist because the players have value and the schools can't win without players. And tampering exists to this level because players are valuable. And they're going to go get them. And they're going to do what it takes to get them. And that's, to me, that's the whole ball game. But if you've got contracts, as you mentioned before, then at least you have contract remedies. I'm still waiting for a school, like even the coaches have contracts. They're tampered with all the time. Coaches are tampered with constantly, but it doesn't bother them because it benefits them. But tampering with a player hurts them, and so that's where the complaining comes from.
All right, so we have an audience of a lot of lawyers, so we're going to get to the fun part, all of the litigation. The NCAA has been the target of a lot of antitrust litigation, and the conferences, including the ACC, are defendants along with them. So let's review some of those big cases that have already been decided. Bubba, you're not a lawyer, but I'm going to let you play one here for a moment. One case that resulted in a 9-0 Supreme Court decision, you alluded to it already, the Alston case, and we know as lawyers those 9-0 decisions don't come along very often with this court. With an important concurrence by Justice Kavanaugh was the Alston decision. So tell us a little bit more about that case and what was the language in Justice Kavanaugh's concurring opinion, which you referred to previously, that was so concerning to the NCAA. Yeah.
Well, Jay, you've been at times, not today, but at times critical of the NCAA. But,
Why don't you tell us?
but I will say we have to give credit to the NCAA that we did unify the Supreme Court. Obviously the Alston case, which was the precursor to NIL, basically, the Kavanaugh did say there's no public good to what you're doing, and we can be more punitive as cases go forward, which is why I think we've seen so many more cases against the NCAA. And to Jay's point, what we thought we were doing, and I say we, and I hate it because the NCAA, we make the rules, but when the NCAA went to a representative governance structure as opposed to one school, one vote, I really became disenfranchised with it because I really didn't think we would have an impact, and we haven't. There's a small number of people that are deeply involved in NCAA governance, and they are making decisions on behalf of the rest of the group. I am not a fan of that governance structure. I think we have one of the worst governance structures going. And so I think that is one of the biggest problems that exists with the NCAA. But when you're in violation of antitrust, and the lawyers have told me numerous occasions, there's only two ways to not be in violation of antitrust. Get a congressional exemption, which I don't think any of us think we would get, or collectively bargain. And all the things that you mentioned about restrictions, all those restrictions that were put in place by the NCAA, we actually thought were for the betterment of intercollegiate athletics. It was to raise graduation rates, provide more academic services, provide mental health, provide more things to our student athletes. But again, it was in violation. But it wouldn't be in violation if we negotiated that with the students that we were working with. So I do think we're getting to some type of a position where we are going to negotiate with student athletes. And the sooner it comes, the better, in my opinion.
Well, Jim, let me, after this 9-0 sweep in the Supreme Court, the lawyers continued on a feeding frenzy and brought lots of other suits. Can you tell us about some of those other lawsuits that are currently going on?
I retired
That's why you're the perfect person.
in January of 2020, and I'm responsible for everything up to that point. Since that point, I've read.
The whole thing went to hell,
I'm like
right?
Jay now. I opine all the time. And I can tell you, giving advice is really nice. Making the decisions a little bit different, but really nice thing. But I think one of the things about O'Bannon and Austin that somehow gets confused is that, O'Bannon did recognize name, image, and likeness. Okay? Didn't recognize pay for play, name, image, and likeness. And Austin just really told the NCAA they couldn't limit the grant and aid to anything less than the full cost of education. I mean, and moreover, they couldn't limit anything that was tethered to education. That means like summer school or internships or study abroad. None of those things have been problems. I mean, now, schools are not spending money on that, which I think is a really interesting insight. I've heard a lot about collectives, but I don't hear one university. Now, they're given the $5,900 cash Alston Award, but they're not spending extra money for other, what I would describe as, things that they could spend it on because they're tethered to education. So it tells you a little bit something about how people spend their money. And then in both cases, there's dicta about the NCAA rules on prohibiting pay for play. Now, the only way we're going to get to contracts, I believe, I don't think we're going to get there congressionally, through a CBA maybe, or through the settlement, which allows for contractual relationships between school and player. Those are the three routes. But in all cases, the most important thing to me, I think, if you want to hold on to anything that looks like college athletics, is for the school to make the payments, not for the boosters to make the payments with no involvement by the school. Now, when the school makes the payments, there's a whole other set of issues that relate to Title IX. And I think that's going to bring forward the same old narrative about how you do it. So on one hand, you have the interest of women under Title IX. On the other hand, is you have a very powerful narrative that the money's being really predominantly made by 2 sports, maybe 2.5 sports, and it's going you're sharing the revenue. Socialistic, isn't it? So that's going to be the rub. And I don't know how that's going to get resolved, but it's going to be resolved in court. It's not going to be resolved on campus, because just listening, I'm not really inquiring much, but listening, everybody's plan is to take at least 80% of that money and use it in football and basketball. And I think there's a recognition that they're going to have to do something on the women's side, but that's not going to be sufficient to slow down the litigation. But the problem is, if that's successful litigation and the universities are going to be hamstrung on their ability to move money around or move it only towards the people that produce it, you're going to get the same narrative come back to, it's going to be like whiplash. Like we were seen as exploiters, and now we're seen as we're exploiting again because we're taking the money that's earned by a certain set of athletes and sharing it more broadly because of the law. So I can't tell you much about Johnson or about employment law, what's going on in those areas, but I think that it was the amount of money that was washing around in the system that got everybody's attention, and the narrative was it wasn't going to the right people. That was a very powerful narrative. And I think that animated legislators, I think it animated the courts, and I think people bought it. The law didn't change. The amount of money changed, and the narrative drove it forward. And so I don't know how that narrative changes if the institutions have the responsibility now to allocate those resources, and they allocate them in any way other than providing it in large ways to the people who earn it.
I think the challenge with that, right? You look at the Indiana Fever had more fans average per game than the Indiana Pacers. And the Indiana Pacers I'm a Celtics fan, they're formidable, right? And so part of that goes back to your ESPN discussion of that's where the money is right now in TV. And so then it's all about windows then, right? Because again, if you put women's basketball on windows where they can't be, where they're not as watched, Sundays, for example, instead of Saturdays, you know, that the windows that are more popular, if they only go to the men, then you're now this chicken or egg scenario of how do you provide value, or how do you offer value equally. So it's going to sprout up the next thing of let's provide more access on different TV streams and revenues. And ESPN feels pressured too about this because they're trying to just make money. They don't really care. And they're finding that if you put women's basketball on certain channels at certain times, you're making more money in some cases, right? So that's going to be the complicated thing as well, I think.
So, Jay, let's hand the microphone back down to you. We've alluded to the House case and the settlement that the NCAA and the conferences are trying to put together with the plaintiffs' lawyers. Could you just outline briefly for the audience what the main components of that settlement are?
Yeah, so the O'Bannon case was basically about name, image, and likeness. Players' likenesses being used in video games without their consent or payment. The Alston case was about academic services. Can you give, as Jim said, can you give them laptops, things like that, summer internships, cost of attendance. And the House case was going after money. Like that's the big one, and the cases like it. It's going after damages, past damages, and also it's going after future earnings. So there are a couple components of this. Now, the House settlement, some people said the exposure that the NCAA had if it went to trial was upwards of $5 billion, $4 to $5 billion, if they were to lose at trial. And that includes, under the Sherman Antitrust Act, damages are tripled. So with this settlement, I think it's 22%. So there's a past damages component where past players will receive compensation, damages for having been illegally restrained during their time in school, and that's a class. And then there's also going to be future revenue sharing. And I think, if I remember right from reading that the settlement agreement, and it hasn't been blessed by the court yet, but talking around 22% of revenues could be shared with the athletes going forward. There are certain conditions on it. How they do it, I'm not sure is completely worked out. Certainly not. I don't understand all of it just yet. I'm kind of waiting for Judge Wilkin to say yes to it and then dive into it. But to me, I get the whole settlement thing. Do I believe that it's trading one restrictive wage ceiling for another? It's trading a restrictive wage ceiling of 0 for now 22%. Yeah, I do. And to Bubba's point, like people would say, well, we need. And sometimes it's petty. They'll say, well, we need a salary cap then. We need a salary cap. I go, okay, if you want a salary cap, just like they have in the NBA or the NFL, NFL and NBA players get 50% of the revenues. You know, right now, college players, even though it seems like they're making a lot of money, they're cheap relative to what they should be getting, in my view. A couple of years ago, Ryan Day, the head football coach at Ohio State, said it's going to cost Ohio State $13 million to keep their roster together. Their coaching staff makes more than that. Their coaching staff makes more than that. And to Jim's point about kind of the narrative, it sort of strains the mind to think that the strength coach at Alabama is worth $1 million a year, but the quarterback is not. You know, that makes no sense. And look, I don't think this is as hard as we're making it. I just don't think so. And we're stuck right now where maybe the NCAA was in 1984 when they're trying to figure out how to sell media rights and do we bundle them together? Does Notre Dame go on their own? How do they do it? It took them a little while to figure it out. But when they figured it out big. And I think we'll figure this out. But, you know, to me, I'm not sure the court should be concerned with the Title IX implications. I think the schools should be concerned with that. You know, the best way not to get sued for antitrust is stop violating federal antitrust law. And the best way to be in compliance with Title IX is be in compliance with Title IX. You know, it's not, I don't think it's that difficult. Most of these schools haven't been in compliance with it since it started. So if there are lawsuits, I tend to think that's a good thing because they're corrective. But that's why we're running to Congress to say, please, the lawsuits are killing us. Please let us allow us and give us a federal blessing to continue to violate the law with your blessing. And I just don't think that's a very good argument.
Jim, I know you want to get back in, but before you do, I want to ask Bubba, a third aspect of that proposed settlement is to do away with scholarship limits and to impose roster caps. And that's kind of one that a lot of people just skip right over. Could you explain the significance of that?
Yeah, and that is a significant issue. Jay, I just want to, in addition to the 22%, when they were negotiating that settlement, this is my understanding, and I don't know Jeffrey Kessler, haven't had any conversations with him, but if you take the scholarships in Division I, add that to the 22%, it's fairly close to 50. So I think they were counting that, quote unquote, as compensation, which got it a little bit closer.
The school paying itself.
Yeah, right, right. Or the donors paying the school, right? But that's how they totaled it up. But that's what it was. The other two components. So one is the revenue share, and then the second is roster caps. So each sport would have a limit, the number of participants on that team, but there would be no scholarship limits. We currently have limits for every sport. 11.7 in baseball, 12.6 in soccer. We may have 4.5 in golf. Every sport had a different number of scholarships. So now you can have full scholarships up to that roster cap. But that does have an impact. It particularly could have an impact or will have an impact here. We have 28 teams, 850 student athletes. So next year with our 28 teams, the roster caps would put us at 735. But the current scholarship allocation based on NCAA limits is 320. Now we could go to 735. Now that's going to be a significant financial challenge for us to do that, so we won't be able to get all the way there, but I think we will be able to add scholarships into our program, but we'll have fewer participants, which I think is disappointing because we have an awful lot of kids, 120 of them, that may not be on a roster next year, and that's disappointing.
Jim.
You know, since this is the Institute for Innovation, let me suggest where this may where there may be answers here. Settlement, I think, is going to be difficult, even if she approves it. It's going to be difficult to manage how you manage all those transactions and have the school pay and then deal with Title IX and then make sure that the deals that are done outside the university meet a fair market test. And then there's so many people coming into the system every year who've not been part of this settlement. So I would see that they would be able to challenge it in one form or another. And so I think, I don't know how much Swiss cheese we have here, how much we can really hope that this pulls it all together. So that's one route. And if you assume that you're not going to get any help in Washington, I think that's a fair assumption. And then I think it's another fair assumption to think that, hey, let's go down and look at the collectively bargained agreement. That's a pretty safe harbor, really, in antitrust law. But like, who's at the table? Is it team by team? Is it the conference? What is it? Okay, but then now, let's just think we've got a industry which is producing, say, $3 or $4 billion a year in TV rights, and you have X number of athletes. You have 100,000 athletes in Division I. I know in the Big Ten we have about 12,000 athletes. There are a lot of people that are on the fringes of business people, on the fringes of intercollegiate athletics. Some of them interested in private debt, some interested in private equity. And if an institution gets themselves in a position where they can't comply, either because of a cultural narrative or because of the law, with a fully broad-based program for men and women where everybody gets paid about the same, and you want to tip your hat in so many different ways. But you really have, honestly, you have a couple profit centers. I've done P&L on every sport in the Big Ten, and they range, if they're not football or basketball, they range from $3 million to $1.5 million annual losses, notwithstanding the Caitlin Clark phenomena. $3 million to $1 million, okay? But let's just say that with the proper antitrust assistance, with the proper consolidation, everything going in your way, there's no doubt that football and basketball at these universities has the ability to be among the very best media sports in the country. If a university really wants to get involved with students and student athletes, why not simply license the stadium, license the marks, take the royalty, reinvest the royalty in all the sports that have $1 million to $3 million a year of red ink, and let somebody else manage these sports. Somebody that's got a real close business eye, somebody who's willing to hold coaches as well as players to account for the contracts that they sign. And maybe they go to school at a certain point, or maybe they don't go to school at a certain point. But the brands are the brands, the alumni are the alumni, the stadiums are the stadiums. But the university's put in a horrible position, I think, in trying to manage in the present environment. And I could see settlement being a struggle. I could see labor management being a problem. I could see Congress being a problem. But if there's billions and billions and billions of dollars out there, why shouldn't the university take the royalty, turn it over to somebody else, and reinvest that money into the student-athlete players' experience? That would be an innovative, probably unlikely, but I'm telling you, you don't have to look very far to see the fact that there's outside money that wants to come in and help and assist.
We appreciate the shout out for the Institute for Innovation, Jim. So you jumped to private equity. And if you pay attention to sports, especially in professional sports, private equity is everywhere, whether you're looking at what's happening with Premier League Soccer or the PGA Tour, Major League Baseball, the NFL just said they'll take some PE money. Jay, I'm curious your thoughts. The difference, obviously, with the university setting is the educational component. So what are your thoughts on private equity in college athletics?
I'm not bothered by the idea of it. I think if private equity money comes in, one of the things they're going to insist upon is athletic departments leaning up a little bit. They're not going to be as big and as bloated as they are now. So that'll certainly change. But I think it's interesting that, you know, we have all these issues that seem so difficult when we talk about paying a relatively small group of athletes. But over the last 4 decades, it hasn't bothered us in the sort of the push-pull with academics and athletics that we've signed these gigantic multi-billion-dollar media rights deals and trot the players out on national television at all these different times. We're traveling private. We're playing on, you know, I think I played in 9 Duke Carolina games. Not one of them was at dark when the game started or ended. We always played on a Saturday in the afternoon. And now those games are played at night, sometimes on a weekend. They used to be played on a midweek day at 9 o'clock at night on the East Coast. Those were business decisions that were made. And that didn't bother us in the academics athletics thing and what this was really supposed to be about. You know, we talk a lot about this is not what this was supposed to be about. I graduated college in 1986, and they used to have us go out and speak to the booster club from time to time. And my senior year, I did that a few times. And if I had gone to our booster club and said to a crowd of folks that were my age now and said, hey, you know, this Coach K guy, he's really good. Someday you're going to pay him $14 million a year. They would have said, we'll never do that. That is not what this is about. And they did it. And the school's still running and pumping out great students and giving great educations, and players are still graduating and going on and doing things, and the world's still firmly on its axis. It's not that big of a deal. Is it what they thought it would be? No. But everybody saw it coming, and it happened pretty routinely and purposefully. I'm not bothered by private equity coming in if that's what a school thinks they want to do. I'm for deregulating most of this and letting the schools and the conferences themselves making the decisions they see fit. Nobody comes in and tells Duke or North Carolina, you can't have a hospital because Ball State can't afford one. You know, we don't do that. But we're worried about, well, Duke and Carolina can get a better quarterback than Ball State can. You know, so therefore it's unfair. None of these schools are going to stop playing because athletics has become too important to the school for this to stop. It's not going to stop. We're not going to stop the size of it. We're not going to stop any of this. So if private equity comes in, they're going to come in for their benefit, and the school better be smart enough to use it for their benefit and protect themselves, because private equity is going to take what they want out of it. And so it better be a smart decision on the part of each institution.
Bubba, any thoughts on private equity or this in general?
No thoughts on private equity. What's wrong with Ball State? I mean, they're going to get a 2 seed.
Hey, Bubba, there is precedent for a number 1 ranked team being kept out. It depends on when you were ranked number 1.
I wanted, Aranza, we haven't spoken to you in a bit. I wanted to jump to you and talk a little bit about student athletes as employees. Are these conversations that you've had with your coaches, with administrators? Any thoughts on that in general?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not well educated on that side. I don't really know what it entails to be employees. Like, all I've heard, it's like bad things that could happen to the athletes if that happens. So I'm sure that's not the case. So yeah, like, I don't really know what that would mean to us as like athletes and like being part of the you know, like the employees of the university. Like, I don't know how would that affect like Olympic sports, because like, as we've heard in this conversation, like, the problem is in basketball, football, or any other sport. It's mostly like Olympic sports and other like smaller non-revenue teams. So yeah, on that side, like, I don't really know what it entails. I like don't know if it will be the best option for all the student athletes that will stay in college in the upcoming years, or if it's not, what would be like the best option for that.
Jay, what do you think? Do you think we are headed to a place where the athletes are employees or independent contractors, where there are agreements? What are your thoughts on that?
Bubba and I talked about this earlier today. I don't really understand why the presidents are so fearful of employment. That seems to be now, the flag used to be planted on the amateurism hill, and that's over. Now they're planting the flag on the employment hill, and they can't be employees. They can't be employees. Meanwhile, a lot of these schools have thousands of student employees in different contexts. I mean, I don't know how many North Carolina has, but I think it's in the thousands of students who are employees, which flies in the face of the NCAA's theory that athletes can't be employees. But that doesn't mean they can't be signed to a contract, as you pointed out, as an independent contractor or maybe a personal services contract, something like that. And there's still the collective bargaining route that I think is an avenue for a better solution here. But I think to an earlier point about roster limits and now unlimited scholarships to the point of the roster limit, that's going to put some schools at a decision, because in so many sports that had these scholarship limits, a lot of these athletes are paying their own way, and they're retained. Retention is a big issue for universities, and especially with the enrollment cliff coming, that's going to be an issue. And there are so many Division II and Division III programs or athletic programs that started football years ago because so many football players would stay 5 years to play football, and they'd pay, and they could retain them. And so that's the transfer portal comes into that. I mean, there's so many issues, but once you sign a player to a contract and there's some skin in the game there, I think a lot of these problems, not all of them, but a lot of these problems are diminished to the point that they're really manageable. But I think some of this, because it's so new, it's raising a lot of questions. Fans have questions. They have questions until the game starts. And once the game starts, it's the same as it ever was. I watched, I didn't get a chance to watch it. Our power was out, but I watched the replay of it, some of the replay. The Alabama-Georgia game, there wasn't an empty seat over protest over NIL, not one. And there will not be an empty seat in the Duke-Carolina basketball game. There wasn't in the football game. The fans want their games. And whether they know what the players are majoring in or not, they'll always be students. That's a condition that the courts have. There's no issue there. Nobody is arguing that college athletes don't have to be full-time students. That's baked in. So I'm not concerned about somehow the football team's going to spin off and they don't have to go to school. They just use the mark. I think they'll always be students. That's fundamental to this enterprise. But the fact that the term student athlete keeps being used, which I railed against when I was a player, I hated that. It came in just because the NCAA wanted to avoid workers' compensation claims. And so Walter Byers mandated that everybody be called student athletes. And it drove me crazy. You go to a press conference, say, no, questions for the student athletes. I'm like, we're players. And, no professor ever said, yes, a question from the student athlete in the back. You're a student when you're in class, and you're an athlete when you're on the floor or on the field. To me, it's not that hard of a distinction to make.
I'm glad you said that, because I've thought that for years, but I'm not Jay Bilas. Courtney, what do you think in college, especially around here with the whole Carolina Duke basketball? Coach K was an icon, and Coach Smith and Coach Williams. The college coaches get a lot. Historically, have really been elevated, and folks look at them, I think, a little bit differently than they look at professional coaches. And you've developed a great reputation yourself. Do you think that if there were contracts with players, that might change that a little bit? In the NBA, for example, there's been a big push in player movement, player empowerment in NBA, NFL, and professional sports in general. Do you think having the players enter into agreements would change the dynamic somewhat between you and your players?
I mean, I think what contracts do is it one would say it protects both sides, or it hurts both sides, right? I think to Jay's point, there's skin in the game. I have a contract, right? And so there's expectations in that contract, right? So as I would tell our players, to answer the question that Aranza got, is that just continue to make yourself valuable. That is like what life is about, right? Like whether you're an employee or not, if you are valuable, you will be valued. Right? And so just continue to play well, continue to get better, continue to be an asset. And so I think I probably err on the side of trusting, Bubba's leadership, but err on the side of what Jay has said, is that I'm not afraid of contracts either, because you can also put what you want in the contract. Right? So you can have some deliverables. What's really hard right now in our space is that we're operating with you're not really allowed to talk about contracts, so you're promising with no deliverables on either side. And it's but we're good, right? And it's not really, because I like to operate in truth and in transparency and in this is A plus B equals C, and you're A and I'm B and we're gonna get C. That's what we're agreeing on. But when it's if you're an employee, that's going to all of a sudden change your love for the game. I actually disagree. And I know there are a lot of people that think that have concerns that NIL, employee, it makes this a job. As a former student athlete, I played in the Ivy League. That's where it's a job, right? I'm the only dummy who actually paid to go to college, right? And I think what it did not change my love for the game. It's all I've ever done is be around sport. So to anyone who has any notion that being an employee or or NIL is decreasing the love for the game, either, as I said, the athletes are playing because they love it, and the fans are watching because they love it. That has never changed, and it won't change, right? And now we're just saying we're going to have some transparent guidelines, and there's going to be a contract that both people agree to. Doesn't change my locker room. My contract is different than my assistant's contract. And there are a lot of days I kind of think being an assistant would be kind of nice, right? And so their contracts will look different maybe than each other, or maybe they won't. That's Bubba's problem. But it doesn't change for me. My job is to continue to make our team valuable, make our product valuable, make myself valuable, and trust that the value will then follow. And where it doesn't, you challenge ESPN, as I've done. When it doesn't, I challenge Bubba every now and then.
More often than not.
And so I hope that answers the question.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit. Okay.
Sorry. Going back to the question, I think, as Coach Courtney said, it doesn't change the love of the game. And I think it goes back all the things of the benefits of NIL and getting money as an athlete, because some athletes are in full scholarship, some athletes are getting money that way, some athletes are paying for their whole college athletic career. And it's a great benefit that you can get money as part of doing what you love and really being the best that you can be at your sport. But I also think with the employment, I think that's why I've heard bad things about it. Is it gonna be a point where if you're not performing well, you're out of the team kind of thing? I think right now, of my understanding, and I could be wrong with this, there's regulations where you cannot be punished just based on your performance. So I think the concerns of many student athletes are, or what I've heard, and I think will be one of my concerns too, is it if I stop performing because of an injury or whatever, is it gonna be of a contract where you're out of the team and stuff? So I think that's where the confusion, the not having all the answers, they seeing what's gonna happen in the next few years. It's all the confusion the student athletes were sorry, athletes, and they feel we're getting. So yeah, I think that's the concern where we get it is beneficial to make money out of the things that we're doing by loving it, by wanting to be better every single day, but also how is it gonna affect me when I'm not performing in the way that I did when coming to college.
But that happens a little bit, I would say, in the NIL, right? We do have to value, you would be valued a little bit more than your teammate if you were on my team. And that's okay, right? And so I do think if there are contracts, I think there will be. I don't think injuries play into that, but yeah, the whole idea of we're all gonna get along and we're all gonna get paid even if we don't perform, I don't think that job exists. That would be a cool job, but I don't think it exists. So what you're worried about is being employed, and you ultimately will have to be employed at some point in your life.
Okay, well, let's switch gears just a little bit and talk about conference realignment and keep the mic down with Aranza. So we've got 3 new schools, Cal, Stanford, and SMU in the ACC. So how is that going to impact, Aranza, you and your fellow teammates?
Yeah, I mean, now I think there's a talk of going to California for some meets. We are going, this year, we're going to SMU for our meet season. I think the biggest thing that, like, everyone, and I'm concerned about it, is school. As like, I've had great communication with my professors, and I've never had a problem with anyone in the academic department or with absences or anything, but it's not the case for everyone. I think that's the biggest concern of how many days of classes we're losing, and we're gonna be competing, and honestly, me personally, I don't like doing homework while I'm competing in between rounds. So I think that's the biggest concern on that. And on the other side, I think in swimming and diving, I think swimming, the ACC is like the top. Like if you make top 5 at ACCs this year, you're gonna be top 10 at NCAAs. Like that's the level that ACCs is bringing on swimming and diving side. I'm not sure of other sports, but I think it does raise the bar on competitions and being competitive and wanting to be the best team and pushing yourself, pushing your team to be better. But I think like the biggest concern is like, is it gonna be enough money for like all the traveling that we have to do as a team? Because our team is like 70, 80 people. So like, how are we gonna go all the way to California? How are they gonna come here? When is it gonna be the time that those competitions are gonna be aligned with our schedule? Because we have ACCs and NCAAs in the spring. So like, are we gonna do that during the fall and stuff? So it's a lot of like, just knowing what's going to happen. But in the competitive side, I think it does benefit. At least I can only speak from the swimming and diving side. It does benefit and like raises the bar of being like top 5, top 10 at the NCAA, ACC level.
Okay. Courtney, what's your perspective on this nationwide travel that's going to be in the future for your team?
Yeah, I feel like it's just something we've dealt with, right? I think that's, we want to play in all the environments and all the games that are big. It's revenue, it's competitiveness, so we fortunately are one of the teams that travels quickly via charter, so that helps. But it's kind of what I say to sometimes when coaches, and our jobs are so hard. Again, I would really question any potential coaches in here to really challenge yourself to think of something else to do with your time. But I'm dumb enough to be stuck in this deal. And it's sort of like you can't want it to be a family business and then get the perks of private charter and get paid well and all of that and not like that, right? And so I want the opportunity to compete against the best. We've been doing it. So we were supposed to play Stanford. They asked Bubba and I about playing at 6 o'clock or 9 o'clock on a Monday night. And we were going to play Cal on a Thursday night. So I'll admit, I called ESPN and found out how many E1, E2 games we have before I said no, right? And then we had 6 or 7 already. So I was like, you know what? I don't want to be out there for a week. And a 9 o'clock tip is like a midnight tip here, which not even my own family will watch. And so, but I think we've been more national. So I think in football and basketball, it's sort of like we get kind of sent where the game is regardless. So I think we have probably less. I think it's newer for some of the other sports who are going to bear the burden of the travel when it's like, yeah, we've been sent to Tuesdays at 9 and nobody has ever really cared.
All right, we're way out of time. We could go here forever, but the subject was the future of college athletics. So we're going to have a lightning round here, and I want you all to think about what's the future of college athletics. You could take a short-term view or a long-term view. Aranza, we'll start with you and just pass the mic down.
Can I have a little more time to think? So, I don't know. Sadly, this is my last year as a college student here. So I don't really know how it's going to affect me in this last year. But I don't know how the future is going to look like. I hope it's always for the benefit of all the student athletes. We all work hard to get to where we are, to get to a school like UNC, to get to school like an Ivy League and everything. So I just hope that it's for the best and like every student athlete can benefit from having this great opportunity of being in the United States, getting an academic career, graduating from a top tier school, and then getting a good job opportunity, staying in a great country. So I think that the future will, like, at the end, I think someone is going to make the right decision, and it's going to benefit every student athlete and every coach, everyone that is involved in the athletics, and hopefully being professional, considered professional in the college level will benefit you also in your career as a professional athlete outside of college.
I think it will be what it's always been. It's about the student athletes and the athletes they play it and the fans who love it. And now it'll just be, I think the future will be less restrictive of the athletes that play it.
If you look out longer term, 10 years, fewer student athletes, fewer teams, collectively bargained agreement, and tiering of programs, sports, and institutions along success lines.
And more women's basketball fans.
There are a lot of them. I don't know.
Explain the tiering.
Bring back Caitlin. We're going to bring her back to Iowa.
Jim, explain a little bit what you mean by the tiering.
Well, you know, I think the ACC, if I looked at it recently, they had 7 fall sports, and they're number 1 in the country in 5 of them, and then I think they were top 10 in the 2 others. And I think if you look at your, you got a great broad-based program. Maybe the Pac-12 was the best. Maybe the ACC's got the best broad-based programs, but it takes resources to do that. And I think that not everybody will have the same resources. So if you see Texas and Texas A&M going over here, and you see UCLA and Southern Cal going over here, you're seeing consolidation, and not everybody can do everything. Certainly, the Big Ten didn't go to Rutgers so they could have a soccer match between Rutgers and Minnesota. It's not why it happened. So I think there's got to be a recognition that some of this travel is just over the top. Maybe some of it's okay. So I just see more consolidation. I see a CBA of some kind. I'm not sure how it works. I see challenging times with Title IX. I don't know how that gets resolved. And I see tiering of sports. And so that means that, maybe baseball isn't as important at Wisconsin as it is at Alabama. Maybe they want to sponsor it, but they don't desire to be nationally competitive. But maybe wrestling at Iowa and Penn State are uber important, and so they invest there. So I just don't think you can be broad and great at everything all the time. Pay athletes and fly them across the country. So I think there's got to be some, and I don't know that we'll ever have more athletes than we have today. I don't think programs are going to be broader. I think they're going to be less broad, more tiered, more regional, and centers of excellence, and it's going to get stabilized through some sort of collective bargain agreement.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I have very similar. I think the commercial activity will continue to grow. I think there will be fewer student athletes, fewer sports, but those will be compensated and their experiences will be extraordinary because of the commercial activity. I think we'll have tiering. We'll still have sports that won't be tiered at that level. And then I also think we'll have a number of sports that will align more closely with their national governing body. And some of those sports will probably move out of a championship segment with the NCAA and go to the national governing body creating that championship, whether it's the swimming or the track or whatever those sports might be. I don't know which ones it'll be, but I think that's where we'll move. But I also agree completely with Courtney. The schools have way too much invested. Sports creates an incredible sense of community that brings people together. And so we're going to have them. We want to compete at a high level. We want students to have an incredible experience. And we want to have a program that reflects the value of the institution. And the size of your institution, the size of your student body, the amount of commercial activity will determine the breadth of your program. And I think here at Carolina, we really value those Olympic sport programs. So we'll always have a very broad program that will support a lot of student athletes.
Yeah, I agree with most of what's been said. I think that in the future, each school is going to have whatever sports benefit that particular school and put the resources behind what it values. As to the number of student athletes, with roster limitations, that means my son, for example, who was a walk-on basketball player at Wake Forest, wouldn't have been a walk-on at Wake. He would have gone to Denison and played in Division II. So he still would have played, he just wouldn't have played at that particular place. So we'll see players playing elsewhere, perhaps not playing, the idea that they don't play at all. So we'll see some players push down a level, which may be appropriate, but those are going to be individual decisions on the part of those players. I still think that in the future there's I don't want to call it a likelihood, but a possibility that the higher resource schools could break away from the NCAA and form their own thing. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. And when you think that, when you think about all the conference realignment and how different things look now than they looked 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it actually conjured up your question again, Aaron. I mean, we're talking about tampering with a player, but you can go out and just take a university. Nobody talks about tampering when it's conference realignment. That happens all the time, and it seems to make good sense to people when it does happen. The Southwest Conference doesn't exist anymore. The ACC was 8 teams when I played in it, and so that meant we took 7 road trips. 5 of them were by bus. That doesn't exist anymore. So everything's different. It's going to continue to change into the future, but I don't discount the very real possibility that we could see the bigger schools kind of break off and form their own thing for the higher dollar sports.
Well, before we end, I can't thank you guys enough for being here and everyone here in the audience for being here. There are a few folks in the audience I wanted to recognize. I know we're running a little over, so bear with us. Rick Evrard, co-head of the collegiate sports practice at Bond, I'm going to butcher this one, Schoeneck and King. He worked with UNC on various NCAA matters and began his career at the NCAA in enforcement and legislative affairs. Rick, we're curious about your observations with everything that we've kind of talked about today.
I didn't anticipate that I was going to speak, but thank you very much. What I will say is a couple of things. First and foremost, Jim, the journey you took us on from the legal perspective from 1960 all the way through where we are today was excellent. And I think that's, you have to be able to really understand that in order to be where we are. Jay, I think most of your criticisms, is that what you called them, Bubba, before? Criticisms? Most of your criticisms really are on point, but I think it's important. I do think it's important to identify the they. When you say the NCAA, and Jim, you said they, we have to identify that these are the presidents of the schools that are making these decisions, and the majority of those presidents, in my judgment, my experience with NCAA practice, the majority of them are not managers. They are academicians who are put into a place to oversee college athletics, and it's up to the administrators here, coaches alike, that really have to make the decisions on their behalf, or at least advise them appropriately. And my last observation is that, Aranza, you are satisfying the one seat that we all are here for, and that's the student-athlete seat. So thank you very much for all of your comments. And I think
Arian Waite is a faculty member in our exercise and sports science department, and she's the head of the Center on Research and Intercollegiate Athletics here at Carolina. And she's the immediate past chair of UNC's Faculty Athletics Committee. Arian, do you have any thoughts? I know you're a former athlete yourself. You don't want to say anything? Okay. And finally, one element that we weren't able to fit here up on stage is the Knight Commission. We've got Peyton Barish, who's a former NC State athlete who ran cross country, I believe, here with the Knight Commission. Peyton, do you have anything particular you'd like to say?
A couple of you touched on it at the end of the conversation, but in 2020, the Knight Commission released a proposal to separate FBS football governance. And considering that the CFP operates independently of the NCAA and the revenues generated by the CFP do not go through the NCAA, but are distributed directly to the conferences and the schools, coupled with the impending House settlement, there seems to be a pretty large financial and philosophical gap growing at the Division I level. And earlier today, College Sports Tomorrow released a proposal that would create 2 separate independent leagues, the Power 12 and the Group of 8, that would exist independently of the NCAA. And I wanted to hear from the experts on this panel, what you think about a proposal to separate FBS football out from the NCAA.
Thank you, Jay. I appreciate you giving me the mic. I don't think they should separate out from the NCAA. I think as a member institution that we should remain in the NCAA. But I do believe the best path for us forward is for the CFP to pay the football players. And I think if we could negotiate the CFP contract with the players and pay them. I think that'd be the first step toward a better future that that you're collectively bargaining with the participants.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank our amazing panel, everybody here.